Here we go. Okay. Good morning. Glad to see everybody here this morning. We're studying in 1 Corinthians, the 9th chapter, which hopefully we'll finish up today and maybe get into a couple verses of the 10th chapter. Of course, we've been studying about Paul's instructions to the Corinthians. When we kind of started the chapter, he was talking about eating the food to the idols, and he would last week we talked about how he kind of conformed his work to meet the needs of the people that he was working with, and kind of a situation where when he was dealing with the former Jews, he worked it from the Jewish angle. When he was dealing with the Gentiles, he would work it from the Gentiles' perspective. So today we're going to kind of finish up that thought and then move into to kind of a different thought to kind of sum up this chapter. So before we go any further, I'd like for Jeff Davis, if you would, lead our minds in prayer.
Almighty Father, definitely humbly bow before you as your servants. Thank you so much, Father, for this day of life you've given us. Thank you, Father, for your word. We ask, Father, that you do what it is and possess it. Be all the teachers here today to provide the word in a way that we can apply things to our lives, that we may be better servants. Thank you so much, Father, for your precious Son. We ask these things in his name.
Amen. All right, so let's look at verse 23. And it says, "And I do all things for the gospel's sake, that I may be a joint partaker thereof." So, Paul had spent the last few verses talking about self-denial and the importance of self-denial and doing things for the good of others. But he also is saying here that, all the good things that you do for other people, you don't want to lose sight of the things that's good for you, and the things that you're going to get out of it also. Paul is trying to lead all these people to eternal salvation, and his reward for this is going to be eternal salvation, because he is doing the things that he was instructed to do, and the things that were kind of embedded into his character. So when we're doing good works and we're doing things for other people and we're doing selfless, sometimes we kind of lose sight of this is something that we're going to get the good from also. And sometimes you can get buried in the details and not see the whole picture. So not only was there a spiritual benefit for the Corinthians there, but there was also a spiritual benefit for Paul himself, for all the things that he had done. And here in the last couple of weeks, I've had a lot of time to sit and watch things on YouTube. And one of the things I've been kind of looking at is stuff on leadership. I'm preparing a class on that. And one of the things it talks about a lot of times in leadership is self-denial. That good leaders, they deny themselves things to make sure that their people are well taken care of, and there's a benefit to that when things get really tough. If you're a good leader, your people are going to follow you because they trust you, because they've seen over the years the self-denial that you've done and putting everything into the work, and it pays off. And I think that Paul really understood this. In 1 Timothy 4:16, he kind of talks about this a little bit more. He said, "Continue in these things, for in doing this thou shalt save both thyself and them that hear me." And then there's lots of other passages where Paul has referred to this, and he understood that all these things that happened to him, they kind of happened for a purpose, and he was going to, it helped him grow, but also he was going to reap the reward in the end. And he kind of kept his eye on the prize there at the end. That's something I think that is a good lesson to us. Comments about that?
example of what we should do when we get with people, not just in a religious setting, but in everyday life. You meet people where they are.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly what, and when he went through these 4 examples of how he related to people, that's what he did. You know, and he wasn't saying, well, I've got all the answers, and you need to listen to me. No, that's not how Paul did it. He needed to lower himself to an individual who needed to find someone to understand.
I think those verses are, it's what Bill's saying is further strengthened in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 19 through 23. It's, to the Jews I became a Jew, to those who are on the side of God.
Mm-hmm.
It's understanding someone's perspective before you go and converse with them. It's really important to understand who you're trying to convert or convince or persuade. Especially when you're talking about the gospel.
Mm-hmm.
If I can paraphrase a PSA that's on TV right now, I'll take Jesus' name out of it, but Paul Adonis.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus begins this thing.
All right, let's move on into verse 24. So Paul is kind of changing the subject here a little bit, and I have found this in studying the whole situation here, this to be a very interesting verse. And, I think one of the things that has really kind of been brought clear in this chapter and studying about the Corinthians there, they were products of their environment. And, sometimes when we study the Bible, we just focus in on the religious stuff, and we don't see all the other things that are going on. And, we don't think about, life is going on, and this is not the center of everybody's life. And people are a product of the environment that they live in. And I think this verse that we're getting ready to talk about, verse 24, if you look at the whole history of all of this, Paul was very insightful when he put this particular verse in this chapter. So let's read it. It says, "Know ye not that they that run in a race run all, but one receiveth the prize, even so run that ye may attain." Now, this, I'm reasonably sure, is an allusion to the Isthmian Games that took place every second year at the Isthmus of Corinth, where these games were held. And basically, this was an Olympic type meet, and there was a whole lot of different events that took place there. And it happened on the seacoast about 9 miles from Corinth. And this was a big deal. This wasn't just a track meet down at the ball field. This was a big event, and a very important event, not only from the sporting standpoint, but also from the political standpoint and cultural.
It was Olympic-like.
Right, and this was a really big deal, and there were some other games that went along with it, but this particular set of games was held the year before and the year after the Olympics that were held there in Greece. And then there was another set of games that kind of went along with this. It was called the Neiman Games, and it was kind of in between these other ones. Now this was not only an athletic event, but it was more of a festival. And it's kind of interesting to note that this is one of the few events where women were able to take place, not in the athletic side, but in the cultural and the musical side of the competition. Now, this particular event was held in the honor of the god Poseidon. And if you'll remember, a couple of weeks ago, we talked about all the different gods that the people there in Corinth worshipped. And there was like kind of a rural sanctuary there on the Isthmus of Corinth, and it kind of a temple there to Poseidon that was there. And this isthmus was a small neck of the island in the Peloponnesian Peninsula, around central Greece. And these games, the winner received a crown. And we're going to talk about that crown in a couple of verses. But these games went all the way back to the 5th century BC. So this was something that had gone on for a long time, even before Paul had, was in that area. This was a long established event. And originally, the winners would receive a wreath of celery. They got a crown made of celery. Couldn't have been much of a crown because I don't know how you make a crown out of celery, but they made a celery crown. And they didn't have any peanut butter with it, no. But later on, and at the time of Paul, they changed from celery to a pine type of crown, because in that particular area there was a particular pine tree that grew that they made the crown out of. I guess they ran out of celery and decided they needed to have a crown of pine. So to win one of these events was a really big deal. The victor would, they would have all kinds of honors. Not only would they get the crown, but sometimes they would make a statue to him. Sometimes they'd write a song about him, and I mean, it was a really big deal. And if it was Athens especially, they were really into this. They would award their winning athletes not only with a big parade and a salute and all that, but they would pay them about 100. I think drachmas is what their currency was, but that was a pretty good chunk of change back in that day for winning the event. Of course, we talked about for years about the Olympics being for amateurs, and it was for a long time. These guys weren't amateurs. These people were pros. They did this for a living. And, these games had been one of the chief means of fostering feelings of brotherhood in that whole particular area. And it was one of the greatest national gatherings. And even when one state was at war with another, they would completely stop the hostilities. Everything would be suspended during the celebration and during the event. And all of the competitors, and this is where I think maybe something that Paul had in mind here. All the competitors that competed in this, they had a 10-month training period where they were under the direction of their coaches and their teachers, and they had their diets restricted. I mean, it was a very intense preparation for, to compete in this event. And I kind of think maybe Paul had that in mind because, he was trying to instill on these people that, there was preparations that were going to have to be made if they were going to win the prize. And, it was, I'm pretty sure, common knowledge back then that, these competitors, this is what it took to compete and win in one of these events. Now, for 30 days prior to the contest, the candidates had to attend and do all these exercises. They apparently had some type of training camp or gymnasium, something along that line that they did. But there was a tremendous amount of preparation. And, we talk a lot in the Bible about preparation. And, this is a kind of a reference to these games and the preparation that, that these people had to have. And at the beginning of the festival, they were required to prove to the judges, first of all, that they were of pure Greek blood. And they also had to prove their citizenship. And just as important, they had to prove and certify that they had done all of the necessary training. And, if you think about that, how's it going to be in the judgment? It's the same type. It's the same type of deal. We're going to be judged on the preparation and doing the things that we're required to do. So, like I say, I don't think that Paul put this in just by chance. And then only after the fulfillment of all these conditions were they allowed to compete. And of course, this was done when they arrived, and it was a big deal. There was a lot of people that were assembled to watch this event. And the race was not merely an exhibition of body strength, but it was a trial of excellence of the competitors. They had gymnastics, they had races, they had I guess like quiz bowls where they did knowledge, their knowledge and things along that line.
I've got the list here of the events, and it was pretty simple. You had the track events, you had chariot races, boxing and wrestling, which were all part of the Olympics.
Right.
You also had what I would call an ancient form of UFC called pancration, which was kind of boxing, kind of wrestling. I think they let you kick too. But they did have musical and poetic contests. So it wasn't just the physical.
And that was the contest that the women were allowed to compete in.
They were allowed to compete in everything else.
And when this kind of reminded me of a NASCAR race, okay? There was a proclamation made, and the names of all the competitors were called out by a herald, and I guess there was even trumpet show and all that kind of stuff in there. I mean, just to be introduced and to make it there was a huge honor. But there was a lot of competitors. But the thing about it was there was only one prize. There wasn't any participation trophies. Nobody remembered who was second. It was the one person to win the prize, and that was what everybody was striving for. And they ran with all their might. They did everything that they could, put forth every effort, because only one person was going to get the prize. And the desire to succeed was so intense that the contestants, there wasn't any pain that they wouldn't endure to win that prize. And the issue of the contest was watched by the relatives, the friends, and of course everybody obviously was excited about this. So, like I say, it was really a really big deal, and their success was going to depend on beating their competitor, and the one who prepared the best and fought the hardest was the one that was going to win. And if they won, then they were going to get the crown and the glory that that went along with it. And we put athletes today who do a really good job like that. We put them on a pedestal and give them sometimes a little bit more treatment, I think, than they deserve. But there's nothing new. This was going on back then, and it was an honor for the family that their person had won this victory, and when they would return home, they'd ride back in a chariot. I mean, it was like I say, it was a really big deal, and probably the best thing was they wrote a song about you, and right. I mean, it was right there at right along that same thing.
You may have in your notes things about Paul and how he knew so much about this. Apparently, he may have been in Corinth for one of these Isthmian game years, and that's not all. They didn't have commodity inns and all-day inns. When they came to Corinth, they lived in tents. Who made tents, or who repaired tents?
Yeah, Paul. Yeah.
Could be that Paul helped support himself during.
By making,
if he was there, is his.
So he's telling these to the Corinth, run like this so that you're going to attain the prize. They knew what the preparation was going to be, and that was the standard that they needed to go by. That if they did all the things that they should be doing, and Paul was expounding to them all the things that needed to be done, if they did this. Their self-denial and put Christ first, they were going to obtain, the victory also. Of course, this victory is a little bit different because more than one person can obtain, a crown in heaven. But they were going to have to put forth an effort, in this contest of life to be able to, to able to obtain this prize. Any comments or questions about that?
Well, it's the same thing. I mean, we've all heard sermons about the same verse. If you run a race in order to obtain the prize, that's the same way with our Christian life. We need to live our Christian life so that we can obtain the prize.
Right.
That's the analogy.
Right. And the good thing about the Christian race is that everybody that runs it and is successful, they're going to receive a crown, not only the one who finishes first, but the one who finishes last. It's kind of like med school. What do you call the guy who finished last his class in med school? You call him doctor, And I think of this when at the old gym at Huntington High up in the corner, there was a big sign, and it had Grantland Rice's famous saying on there: "For when the one great scorer comes to mark against your name, he writes not whether you won or lost, but how you play the game." And that's kind of a good saying there. And when we're judged in the end, obviously we're going to win when we go to heaven, but we're going to be judged on how we play the game.
Well, it also says that, you got to run. You can't see it.
Right.
For Christians,
Yeah. Run the race. Yeah.
You can't just come in here and say that God gives it to you.
Right.
You have to make an effort.
Yeah. I think this.
It's like you said for the Olympic Games. It's a lifestyle training.
Right. It's kind of like the old saying that the only place that success becomes before work is in the dictionary. So that's kind of the saying on that. All right, let's move on to verse 25. And every man that striveth in the games exercises self-control in all things. Now they that do it receive a corruptible crown, but we an incorruptible crown. So he's continuing on here that, we need to go on, do the work, don't complain about it, play by the rules. Just like these athletes did for 10 months, they had to follow the rules and do what they were supposed to do. And if they were successful, that they would win a crown. But the problem with that crown is it was a corruptible crown. It was going to go away. And if you think about what it was made out of, celery and pine needles, it probably, first of all, the pine needle one probably wouldn't be a very comfortable one to wear, but it's going to fade away. But a crown in heaven is going to be incorruptible, and it's going to be there it's going to be there forever. So if we follow the rules and do what the Bible tells us to do, and continue on without complaining, we're going to win the race in the end. And when you look back on it, all the hardships and all the fatigue and all those things, it's going to be worth it. You think about in an athletic event, you're completely wore out, but in the end you win. You don't think about all the things that you did to get there. All that pain and stuff kind of goes away because you win. And it's not just an athletic event; it's in everything. You do something that that's really difficult to do, and you succeed. You think about the success more than you do the problems that it took to get there. So the crown that we're going to get is going to be a whole lot better than a crown of pine leaves, because when we're the victor. Comments about that verse? Okay, so let's look at verse 26. I therefore so run as not uncertainly, so fight I as not beating the air. So here Paul appeals to his own conduct as an illusion of the lesson, which he is trying to teach to these people. And he reminds them that the whole of this chapter has been a vindication of his own self-denial, and that he has a clear and definite object in view. He sees what the goal is, and he's using himself as an example of what it's going to take to obtain that goal. And you think about all the thing that all the things that Paul did. That's a pretty high standard to meet, and to go through all the things that he did. But he had that object in mind. The objective was to gain heaven, and he was going to do everything necessary to do it, no matter how belittling sometimes it was. And he had that resolve. And we need to have the resolve also, to win that crown, and not really think about defeat. If you keep thinking about defeat all the time, you know what? You're going to lose. And I heard a saying here not too long ago on one of the things that, show me a good loser and I'll show you a loser. And it's kind of the same deal. You don't think about failing. You don't go into an event to fail. You should go in an event to win. And it's not just this athletic event. It's anything that you do. You should go into that with the mindset that you're going to succeed. And when things are not going your way, there's always something else that can be done. It's not 3 strikes, you're out. You just keep going. There's always something that you can do if you keep trying, and eventually you're going to succeed. And you think about some of the inventions and stuff that we don't think about. You think that Edison, the first time he did a light bulb, it was just like that. It was hundreds of elements that he tried, to come up with a light bulb. Well, he said, well, you know what? That didn't work. I'm going to quit. That attitude will get you in trouble. And that's what Paul's talking about here. He has to run, and you have to fight sometimes to get to where you need to be. And he's focusing them on making sure that all of them were going toward the goal that they wanted to achieve. Comments about that verse? Oh, wait a minute. This is great. This is great here at the end. He didn't want to do it like he was beating air. He just wasn't going through the motions. He was accomplishing things as as he went on. He had an adversary to contend against, and he did not strive with uncertain blows. He made everything that he did count for the good. He wasn't just going through the motions. He wasn't just flapping his jaws. He was working toward that purpose the whole time. Comments about that verse? All right, let's look at verse 27. But I buffet my body and bring it into bondage, lest any means, after I have preached to others, I myself should be rejected. So by this he plainly means that his whole embodied self as acting on, through his body. Everything that he's got, every part of his body, his mind, everything is under control, and it's working toward this goal, because I think he realizes that it's easy to stray off the path. And he had to constantly think about him and beat down the things that were inclinations that would get him off the path. And every man's body is his enemy when instead of being his servant. And you have to get your mind in the spot where your mind gets control of all the things that you do. And the body has to function the way that it needs to function. And if you abuse it, it's not going to function the way that it should, and that could be an issue. So he uses the illusion here of bondage, and he puts himself under subjection, that he's going to serve and do those types of things. And it's something I think he had on his mind, quite a bit. In Galatians 5:17, he says, "For the flesh lusteth against the spirit, and the spirit against the flesh, for these are contrary the one to the other." And then in Romans 8:7, he says, "Because the mind of the flesh is the enemy of God." So he understood that there was a price that had to be paid here, and that he had to get himself under control and keep himself under control, so that he controlled the lusts and desires that would be against the against the Spirit.
Matter of fact, the word that's translated from the Greek or be means to give yourself a black eye.
Mm-hmm.
And what Paul is saying, he can be a little rough on himself.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe in his mind he needed to be. Again, that's that self-discipline, that self-control that he wanted to maintain as a Christian. Sometimes he had to get a little rough, a little denying of himself,
Mm-hmm.
because he had his eyes on Christ.
Right. And people get themselves in a situation, and I think about people who are alcoholics and they quit drinking. They still want that drink. People who quit smoking, they still want that smoke. And I think sometimes that somebody who has never done those things don't realize how difficult it is and how much self-control it takes for that to not to go back to that type of thing. And I've worked on the ambulances over the years with some people who had a drinking problem, and they'd stopped it. And one of the things about working on an ambulance, sometimes between the pot smoking and the drinking, you get out of the back of the truck sometimes and you're almost intoxicated just by smelling them, or you're high just by smelling the pot and all that kind of stuff. And that's hard. That was hard on those people, because they think, God, I'd really like to have a drink, or I'd really like to take a smoke or something like that. So it took a tremendous amount of self-control. Paul, wrote about this also in 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 3 and 5. He says, "For though we walk in the flesh, we do not war according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not the flesh, but mighty before God to the casting down of strongholds, casting down imaginations and every high thing that is exalted against the knowledge of God, and bring every thought into captivity to the obedience of Christ." So this was something, all the way through Paul's writings, he expounded on this to make sure that those people, pretty understood. And, by his devotion to the Lord and all these persevering efforts that he had, it brought his heart and his mind into subjection to the will of Christ and to the will of God. And it shows that the heart can be trained, to do these things. And you can train yourself to ignore all the other things and keep focused on the things that are important. If you think about it, Paul started out persecuting the church. He was absolutely against. He made a great change. And as strong-willed as he was, you'd have to think sometimes he might have had a tendency to backslide, as they say, a little bit, but he had trained himself to not to do that. And this state is gained only by the constant study of God's word, and taking in the things of the Spirit, and cultivating these feelings and making them part of your subconscious, that just subconsciously and automatically you follow these things. It's just like we train a child when he goes into the store, they don't steal stuff, and it's in their subconscious that they know that this is not something that that they're supposed to do. And if we do these things and we study the Bible and we take it into our heart and we follow it, it's going to be an easier deal than if we don't do these things and don't train our mind. And I think even in the Old Testament it talked about about training the children and bringing them up the way that they should go, and they learn it early, and they make it part of their subconscious, and make it part of their mind, and they'll do a whole lot better job than anything else. And these are the things that he has preached to those people. And the image here is carried on, and Paul says that he has a further motive to live the life of self-denial, having acted as a herald proclaiming the conditions of the contest and requiring the people to follow it. And it all boils down to he's trying to lead by example. And that's what it comes down to. He is setting an example to these people, and unfortunately, he's having to remind them of the example that he was showing them, and showing them the type of person that they need to follow. Because if you'll remember at the beginning of this chapter, they were in a lot of disarray about following all these different people, and they were following the people instead of following Jesus and God. And he's focusing them in again on how important that this is. And he also realizes that if he doesn't do this right, that he could be rejected also. So he was very careful in how he did things and how he preached the word and the word that he preached, because he realized that as strong as he was, as many good things as he did, that he could do something that would cause him to lose his soul eternally.
You get on this week of how educated he was, and I'm sure most of us in here can kind of relate to that as far as being around somebody that's extremely well educated, and they have a tendency to speak down to those that are not as educated.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he had quite a knack for getting on the individual level, finding some kind of common ground.
Right.
To talk with. And not very many of us can do that. He obviously has some kind of special gift.
Right.
He can find something that he can talk to you about and help get it. I don't know, something common that you can then start teaching them the gospel.
Right.
Be able to tell.
And that goes back to that self-denial and being humble to go there. And one of the things I think that gets missed in a lot of this is the courage that Paul had to go into this group and say that. Because he in some ways he went into a hostile environment in this deal. This was a church this was a church that was probably in disarray, and he was of course this was later, he wasn't physically there, but he was telling them what they needed to know. And that's an important thing. It's easy to tell people what they want to hear, but it's not always easy to tell people what they need to know. All right, so it looks like I got about 2 minutes. I'm going to stop. And Bill, you can start clean next week with chapter 10. So I appreciate everybody's attention and comments.